to all of them. His glance flickered over everyone. You have saved our lives more than once, and I have been ungrateful. But he paused. It's all so strange. It's going to get stranger. Raistlin's voice was ominous. The companions were drawing nearer Prayer's eye peak. They had been able to see it from the road, rising above the forests. Its split peak looked like two hands pressed together in prayer, thus the name. The rain had stopped. The woods were deathly quiet. The companions began to think that the forest animals and birds had vanished from the land, leaving an eerie, empty silence behind. All of them felt uneasy, except perhaps Tasselhoff, and kept peering over their shoulders or drawing their swords at shadows. Sturm insisted on walking rear guard, but he began lagging behind as the pain in his head increased. He was becoming dizzy and nauseated. Soon he lost all conception of where he was and what he was doing. He knew only that he must keep walking, placing one foot in front of the other, moving forward, like one of Tass's automatons. How did Tass's story go? Sturm tried to remember through a haze of pain. These automatons served a wizard who had summoned a demon to carry the Kender away. It was nonsense, like all the Kender's stories. Sturm put one foot in front of the other. Nonsense. Like the old man's stories, the old man in the inn, stories of the white stag and ancient gods, Paladin, stories of Huma. Sturm clasped his hands on his throbbing temples, as if he could hold his splitting head together. Huma. As a boy, Sturm had fed on stories of Huma. His mother, daughter of a knight of Solamnia, married to a knight, had known no other stories to tell her son. Sturm's thoughts turned to his mother, his pain making him think of her tender ministrations when he was sick or hurt. Sturm's father had sent his wife and their son into exile because the boy, his only heir, was a target for those who would see the knights of Solamnia banished forever from the face of Kryn. Sturm and his mother took refuge in solace. Sturm made friends readily, particularly with one other boy, Karaman, who shared his interest in all things military. But Sturm's proud mother considered the people beneath her, and so, when the fever consumed her, she had died alone, except for her teenage son. She had commended the boy to his father, if his father still lived, which Sturm was beginning to doubt. After his mother's death, the young man became a seasoned warrior under the guidance of Tanis and Flint, who adopted Sturm as they had unofficially adopted Karaman and Raistlin. Together with Tasselhoff, the travel-loving Kender, and, on occasion, the twins' wild and beautiful half-sister, Kitiara, Sturm and his friends escorted Flint on his journeys through the lands of Abyssinia, plying his trade as a metalsmith. 5 years ago, however, the companions decided to separate to investigate reports of evil growing in the land. They vowed to meet again at the Inn of the Last Home. Sturm had traveled north to Solamnia, determined to find his father and his heritage. He found nothing, and only narrowly escaped with his life and his father's sword and armor. The journey to his homeland was a harrowing experience. Sturm had known the knights were reviled, but he had been shocked to realize just how deep the bitterness against them ran. Huma, Lightbringer, Knight of Solamnia, had driven back the darkness years ago during the Age of Dreams, and thus began the Age of Might. Then came the Cataclysm, when the gods abandoned man, according to the popular belief. The people had turned to the knights for help, as they had turned to Huma in the past, but Huma was long dead. The knights could only watch, helplessly, as terror rained down from heaven and Kryn was smote asunder. The people had cried to the knights, but they could do nothing, and the people had never forgiven them. Standing in front of his family's ruined castle, Sturm vowed that he would restore the honor of the Knights of Solamnia, if it meant that he must sacrifice his life in the attempt. But how could he do that, fighting a bunch of clerics? He wondered bitterly, the trail dimming before his eyes. He stumbled, caught himself quickly. Huma had fought dragons. Give me dragons, Sturm dreamed. He lifted his eyes. The leaves blurred into a golden mist, and he knew he was going to faint. Then he blinked. Everything came sharply into focus. Before him rose Prayer's Eye Peak. He and his companions had arrived at the foot of the old glacial mountain. He could see trails twisting and winding up the wooded slope, trails used by Solace residents to reach picnic spots on the eastern side of the peak. Next to one of the well-worn paths stood a white stag. Sturm stared. The stag was the most significant animal the knight had ever seen. It was huge, standing several hands taller than any other stag the knight had hunted. It held its head proudly, its splendid rack gleaming like a crown. Its eyes were deep brown against its pure white fur, and it gazed at the knight intently, as if it knew him. Then, with a slight shake of its head, the stag bounded away to the southwest. "Stop!" the knight called out hoarsely. The others whirled around in alarm, drawing weapons. Tanis came running back to him. "What is it, Sturm?" The knight involuntarily put his hand to his aching head. "I'm sorry, Sturm," Tanis said. "I didn't realize you were as sick as this. We can rest. We're at the foot of Prayer's Eye Peak. I'm going to climb the mountain and see." "No, look." The knight gripped Tanis's shoulder and turned him around. He pointed. "See it? The white stag." The white stag. Tanis stared in the direction the knight indicated. "Where?" "I don't—" "There," Sturm said softly. He took a few steps forward, toward the animal who had stopped and seemed to be waiting for him. The stag nodded its great head. It darted away again, just a few steps, then turned to face the knight once more. "He wants us to follow him," Sturm gasped. "Like Huma." The others had gathered around the knight now, regarding him with expressions that ranged from deeply concerned to obviously skeptical. "I see no stag of any color," Riverwind said, his dark eyes scanning the forest. "Head wound." Caraman nodded like a charlatan cleric. "Come on, Sturm. Lie down and rest while—" "You great blithering idiot!" The knight snarled at Caraman. "With your brains in your stomach, it is just as well you do not see the stag. You would probably shoot it and cook it. I tell you this, we must follow it." "The madness of the head wound," Riverwind whispered to Tanis. "I have seen it often." "I'm not sure," Tanis said. He was silent for a few moments. When he spoke, it was with obvious reluctance. "Though I have not seen the white stag myself, I have been with one who has, and I have followed it, like in the old man's story." His hand absently fingered the ring of twisted ivy leaves that he wore on his left hand, his thoughts with the golden-haired elf maiden who wept when he left Qualanasti. "You're suggesting we follow an animal we can't even see?" Caraman said, his jaw going slack. "It would not be the strangest thing we have done," Raceland commented sarcastically in his whispering voice. "Though, remember, it was the old man who told the tale of the white stag, and the old man who got us into this. It was our own choice got us into this," Tanis snapped. "We could have turned the staff over to the High Theocrat and talked our way out of the predicament. We've talked our way out of worse." I say we follow Stum. He has been chosen, apparently, just as Riverwind was chosen to receive the staff. But it's not even leading us in the right direction, Caraman argued. You know as well as I do there are no trails through the western part of the woods. No one ever goes there. All the better, Gold Moon said suddenly. Tanis said those creatures must have the paths blocked. Maybe this is a way out. I say we follow the night. She turned and started off with Sturm, not even glancing back at the others, obviously accustomed to being obeyed. Riverwind shrugged and shook his head, scowling darkly, but he walked after Gold Moon, and the others followed. The night left the well-trodden paths of Prayer's Eye Peak behind, moving in a southwesterly direction up the slope. At first, it appeared Caraman was right. There were no trails. Sturm was crashing through the brush like a madman. Then, suddenly, a smooth, wide trail opened up ahead of them. Tanis stared at it in amazement. What or who cleared this trail? He asked Riverwind, who was also examining it with a puzzled expression. I don't know, the plainsman said. It's old. That felled tree has lain there long enough to sink over halfway into the dirt, and it's covered with moss and vines. But there are no tracks other than Sturm's. There's no sign of anyone or any animal passing through here. Yet why isn't it overgrown? Tanis couldn't answer, and he couldn't take the time to think about it. Sturm forged ahead rapidly. All the party could do was try to keep him in sight. Goblins, boats, lizard men, invisible stags, what next? Complained Flint to the Kendall. I wish I could see the stag, Tass said wistfully. Get hit on the head, the dwarf snorted. Although we knew, we probably couldn't tell the difference. The companions followed Sturm, who was climbing with a wild kind of emotion, his pain and wound forgotten. Tanis had difficulty catching up with the night. When he did, he was alarmed at the feverish gleam in Sturm's eye. The night was obviously being guided by something. The trail led them up the slope of Prayer's Eye Peak. Tanis saw that it was taking them to the gap between the hands of stone, a gap that, as far as he knew, no one had ever entered before. Wait a moment, he gasped, running to catch up with Sturm. It was nearly midday, he guessed, though the sun was still hidden by jagged gray clouds. Let's rest. I'm going to take a look at the land from over there. He pointed to a rock ledge that jutted out from the side of the peak. Rest, repeated Sturm vaguely, stopping and catching his breath. He stared ahead for a moment, then turned to Tanis. Yes, we'll rest. His eyes gleamed brightly. Are you all right? Fine, Sturm said absently, and paced around the grass, gently stroking and smoothing his mustaches. Tanis looked at him a moment, irresolute, then went back to the others who were just coming over the crest of a small rise. We're going to rest here, Hathor said, braced himself with a sigh of relief and sank down in the wet leaves. I'm going to have a look north, see what's moving back on the road to Haven. Tanis added. I'll come with you, Riverwind offered. Tanis nodded, and the two left the path, heading for the rock ledge. Tanis glanced at the tall warrior as they walked together. He was beginning to feel comfortable with the stern, serious plainsman. A deeply private person himself, Riverwind respected the privacy of others, and would never think of probing the boundaries Tanis set around his soul. This was as relaxing to the Hathor as a night's unbroken sleep. He knew that his friends, simply because they were his friends and had known him for years, were speculating on his relationship with Kitiara. Why had he chosen to break it off so abruptly 5 years ago? And why, then, his obvious disappointment? when she failed to join them. Riverwind, of course, knew nothing about Kitjana, but Tanis had the feeling that if he did, it would be all the same to the plainsman. It was Tanis's business, not his. When they were within sight of the Haven Road, they crawled a few feet, inching their way along the wet rock until they came to the rim of the ledge. Tanis, looking below and to the east, could see the old picnic paths disappearing around the sides of the mountain. Riverwind pointed, and Tanis realized there were creatures moving along the picnic trails. That explained the uncanny hush in the forest. Tanis pressed his lips together grimly. The creatures must be waiting to ambush them. Sturm and his white stag had probably saved their lives. But it wouldn't take the creatures long to find this new trail. Tanis glanced below him and blinked. There was no trail. There was nothing but thick, impenetrable forest. The trail had closed behind them. I must be imagining things, he thought. And he turned his eyes back to Haven Road and the many creatures moving along it. It hadn't taken them long to get organized, he thought. He gazed farther to the north and saw the still, peaceful waters of Crystalmere Lake. Then his glance traveled to the horizon. He frowned. There was something wrong. He couldn't place it immediately, so he said nothing to Riverwind but stared at the skyline. Storm clouds massed in the north, more thickly than ever, long gray fingers raking the land and reaching up to meet them. That was it. Gripping Riverwind's arm, Tanis stabbed his fingers northward. Riverwind looked, squinting, seeing nothing at first. Then he saw it, black smoke drifting into the sky. His thick, heavy brows contracted. Campfires, Tanis said. Many hundred campfires. Riverwind amended softly. The fires of war. That is an army encampment. So the rumors are confirmed, Sturm said when they returned. There is an army to the north. But what army? Whose and why? What are they going to attack? Caraman laughed incredulously. No one would send an army after this staff. The warrior paused. Would they? The staff is but a part of this, Raistland hissed. Remember the fallen stars. Children's stories. Flint sniffed. He upended the empty wineskin, shook it, and sighed. My stories are not for children, Raistland said viciously, twisting up from the leaves like a snake. And you would do well to heed my words, dwarf. There it is. There's the stag, Sturm said suddenly, his eyes staring straight at a large boulder. Or so it seemed to his companions. It is time to go. The knight began walking. The others hastily gathered their gear together and hurried after him. As they climbed ever farther up the trail, which seemed to materialize before them as they went, the wind switched and began blowing from the south. It was a warm breeze, carrying with it the fragrance of late-blooming autumn wildflowers. It drove back the storm clouds, and just as they came to the cleft between the two halves of the peak, the sun broke free. It was well past midday when they stopped to rest for one more brief period before attempting the climb through the narrow gap between the walls of Prayer's Eye Peak, through which Sturm said they must go. The stag had led the way, he insisted. It'll be supper time soon, Caraman said. He heaved a gusty sigh, staring at his feet. I could eat my boots. They're beginning to look good to me, too, Flint said grumpily. I wish that stag was flesh and blood. It might be useful for something besides getting us lost. Shut up. Sturm turned on the dwarf in a sudden rage, his fists clenched. Tanis rose quickly. put his hand on the knight's shoulder, holding him back. Sturm stood glaring at the dwarf, mustaches quivering. Then he jerked away from Tanis. "Let's go," he muttered. As the companions entered the narrow defile, they could see clear blue sky on the other side. The south wind whistled across the steep white walls of the peak, soaring above them. They walked carefully, small stones causing their feet to slip more than once. Fortunately, the way was so narrow that they could easily regain their balance by catching themselves against the steep walls. After about 30 minutes of walking, they came out on the other side of Prayer's Eye Peak. They halted, staring down into a valley. Lush, grassy meadowland flowed in green waves below them to lap on the shores of a light green aspen forest far to the south. The storm clouds were behind them, and the sun shone brightly in a clear, azure sky. For the first time, they found their cloaks too heavy, except for Raistlin, who remained huddled in his red, hooded cape. Flint had spent the morning complaining about the rain, and now started in on the sunshine. It was too bright, glaring into his eyes. It was too hot, beating down on his helm. "I say we throw the dwarf off the mountain," growled Karaman to Tanis. Tanis grinned. He'd rattle all the way down and give away opposition. "Who's down there to hear him?" Karaman said, gesturing toward the valley with his broad hand. "I bet we're the first living beings to set eyes on this valley." "First living beings," Raistlin breathed. "You are right there, my brother. For you look on darkened wood." No one spoke. Riverwind shifted uncomfortably. Gold Moon crept over to stand beside him, staring down into the green trees, her eyes wide. Flint cleared his throat and fell silent, stroking his long beard. Sturm regarded the forest calmly. So did Tasselhoff. "It doesn't look bad at all," the Kender said cheerfully. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, a sheaf of parchment spread out on his knees, he was drawing a map with a bit of charcoal, attempting to trace their way up Prayer's Eye Peak. "Looks are as deceptive as light-fingered Kender," Raistlin whispered harshly. Tasselhoff frowned, started to retort, then caught Tanis's eye and went back to his drawing. Tanis walked over to Sturm. The knight stood out on a ledge, the south wind blowing back his long hair and whipping his frayed cape about him. "Sturm, where is the stag? Do you see it now?" "Yes," Sturm answered. He pointed downward. "It walked across the meadow. I can see its trail in the tall grass. It has gone into the aspens there." "Gone into darkened," Tanis murmured. "Who says that is darkened wood?" Sturm turned to face Tanis. "Raistlin, bah! He is Magi," Tanis said. "He is crazed," Sturm replied. Then he shrugged. "But stay here rooted on the side of the peak if you like, Tanis. I will follow the stag, as did Humor, even if it leads me into darkened wood." Wrapping his cloak around him, Sturm climbed down the ledge and began to walk along a winding trail that led down the mountainside. Tanis returned to the others. "The stag's leading him on a straight path right into the forest," he said. "How certain are you that this forest is darkened wood, Raistlin?" "How certain is one of anything, half-elf," the mage replied. "I am not certain of drawing my next breath. But go ahead, walk into the wood that no living man has ever walked out of. Death is life's one great certainty, Tanis." The half-elf felt a sudden urge to throw Raistlin off the side of the mountain. He stared after Sturm, who was nearly halfway down into the valley. "I'm going with Sturm," he said suddenly. But I'll be responsible for no one else in this decision. The rest of you may follow as you choose. I'm coming. Tasselhoff rolled his map up and slipped it into his scroll case. He scrambled to his feet, sliding in the loose rock. Ghosts. Flint scowled at Raceland, snapped his fingers derisively, then stumped over to stand beside the half-elf. Gold Moon followed, unhesitatingly, though her face was pale. Riverwind joined the group more slowly, his face thoughtful. Tanis was relieved. The barbarians had many frightening legends of darkened wood, he knew. And finally, Raceland moved forward so rapidly he took his brother completely by surprise. Tanis regarded the mage with a slight smile. Why do you come? He couldn't help asking. Because you will need me, half-elven, the mage hissed. Besides, where would you have us go? You have allowed us to be led this far. There can be no turning back. It is the ogre's choice you offer us, Tanis. Die fast or die slow. He set off down the side of the peak. Coming, brother! The others glanced uneasily at Tanis as the brothers passed. The half-elf felt like a fool. Raceland was right, of course. He let this go far beyond his control, then made it seem as if it were their decision, not his, allowing him to go forward with a clear conscience. Angrily, he picked up a rock and hurled it far down the mountainside. Why was it his responsibility in the first place? Why had he gotten involved when all he had wanted was to find Kitiara and tell her his mind was made up? He loved her and wanted her. He could accept her human frailties as he had learned to accept his own. But Kit hadn't come back to him. She had a new lord. Maybe that's why he... Oh, Tanis! The Kender's voice floated up to him. I'm coming, he muttered. The sun was just beginning to dip into the west when the companions reached the edge of the forest. Tanis figured they had at least 3 or 4 hours of daylight left, if the stag continued to lead them on smooth, clear trails. They might be able to get through this fog. Before darkness fell. Sturm waited for them beneath the aspens, resting comfortably in the leafy green shade. The companions left the meadow slowly, none of them in any hurry to enter the woods. The stag entered here, Sturm said, rising to his feet and pointing into the tall grass. Tanis saw no tracks. He took a drink of water from his nearly empty water skin and stared into the forest. As Tasselhoff had said, the wood did not seem sinister. In fact, it looked cool and inviting after the harsh brilliance of the autumn sunshine. Maybe there'll be some game in here, Karaman said, rocking back on his heels. Not stags, of course. He added hastily. Rabbits, maybe. Shoot nothing. Eat nothing. Drink nothing. In darkened wood, Raceland whispered. Tanis looked at the mage, whose hourglass eyes were dilated. The metallic skin shone a ghastly color in the strong sunlight. Raceland leaned upon his staff, shivering as if from a chill. Children's stories, Flint muttered, but the dwarf's voice lacked conviction. Although Tanis knew Raceland's flair for the dramatic, he had never seen the mage affected like this before. What do you sense, Raceland? He asked quietly. There is a great and powerful magic laid on this wood, whispered Raceland. Evil? Asked Tanis. Only to those who bring evil in with them. the mage stated.
Then you are the only one who need fear this forest,
Sturm told the mage coldly. Caraman's face flushed an ugly red. His hand fumbled for his sword. Sturm's hand went to his blade. Tanis gripped Sturm's arm as Raceland touched his brother. The mage stared at the knight, his golden eyes glimmering.
We shall see,
Raceland said. The words, nothing more than hissing sounds flicking between his teeth.
We shall see.
Then, leaning heavily upon his staff, Raceland turned to his brother.
Coming?
Caraman glared angrily at Sturm, then entered the wood, walking beside his twin. The others moved after them, leaving only Tanis and Flint standing in the long, waving grass.
I'm getting too old for this, Tanis,
the dwarf said suddenly. Nonsense, the half-elf replied, smiling. You fought like a...
No, I don't mean the bones or the muscles.
The dwarf looked at his gnarled hands.
Though they're old enough. I mean the spirit. Years ago, before the others were born, you and I would have walked into a magic wood without giving it a second thought. Now...
Cheer up, Tanis said. He tried to sound light, though he was deeply disturbed by the dwarf's unusual somberness. He studied Flint closely for the first time since meeting outside Solace. The dwarf looked old, but then Flint had always looked old. His face, what could be seen through the mass of gray beard and mustaches and overhanging white eyebrows, was brown and wrinkled and cracked like old leather. The dwarf grumbled and complained, but then Flint had always grumbled and complained. The change was in the eyes. The fiery luster was gone. Don't let Raceland get to you, Tanis said. We'll sit around the fire tonight and laugh at his ghost stories.
I suppose so,
Flint sighed. He was silent for a moment, then said,
Someday I'll slow you up, Tanis. I don't ever want you to think, why do I put up with this grumbling old dwarf?
Because I need you, grumbling old dwarf, Tanis said, putting his hand on the dwarf's heavy-set shoulder. He motioned into the wood after the others. I need you. They're all so young. You're like a solid rock that I can set my back against as I wield my sword. Flint's face flushed in pleasure. He tugged at his beard, then cleared his throat roughly.
Yes, well, you were always sentimental. Come along, we're wasting time. I want to get through this confounded forest as fast as possible.
Then he muttered,
Just glad it's daylight.
Chapter 10. Darkened Wood. The Dead Walk. Raceland's Magic. The only thing Tanis felt on entering the forest was relief at being out of the glare of the autumn sun. The half-elf recalled all the legends he had heard of Darkened Wood, stories of ghosts told around the forest, and he kept in mind Raceland's foreboding. But all Tanis felt was that the forest was so much more alive than any other he had ever entered. There was no deathly hush, as they had experienced earlier. Small animals chattered in the brush. Birds fluttered in the high branches above them. Insects with gaily colored wings flitted past. Leaves rustled and stirred. Flowers swayed, though no breeze touched them, as if the plants reveled in being alive. All of the companions entered the forest with their hands on their weapons, wary and watchful and distrustful. After a time of trying to avoid making leaves crunch, Tass said it seemed kind of silly, and they relaxed. All except Raceland. They walked for about 2 hours, traveling at a smooth but rapid, easy pace along a smooth and clear trail. Shadows lengthened as the sun made its downward slide. Tanis felt at peace in this forest. He had no fear that the awful, winged creatures could follow them here. Evil seemed out of place, unless, as Raceland said, one brought one's own evil into the wood. Tanis looked at the mage. Raceland walked alone, his head bowed. The shadows of the forest trees seemed to gather thickly around the young mage. Tanis shivered and realized that the air was turning cool as the sun dropped below the treetops. It was time to begin thinking about making camp for the night. Tanis pulled out Tasselhoff's map to study it once more before the light faded. The map was of elven design and written across the forest in flowing script were the words, "Darken Wood." But the woods themselves were only vaguely outlined, and Tanis couldn't be certain if the words pertained to this forest or one farther south. Raceland must be wrong, Tanis decided. This can't be Darken Wood. Or if so, its evil was simply a product of the mage's imagination. They walked on. Soon it was twilight, that time of evening when the dying light makes everything most vivid and distinct. The companions began to lag. Raceland limped, and his breath came in wheezing gasps. Sturm's face turned ashen. The half-elf was just about to call a halt for the night when, as if anticipating his wishes, the trail led them right to a large, green glade. Clear water bubbled up from underground and trickled down smooth rocks to form a shallow brook. The glade was blanketed with thick, inviting grass. Tall trees stood guard duty on the edges. As they saw the glade, the sun's light reddened, then faded, and the misty shades of night crept around the trees. "Do not leave the path," Raceland intoned as his companions started to enter the glade. Tanis sighed. "Raceland," he said patiently, "we'll be all right. The path is in plain sight, not 10 feet away. Come on. You've got to rest. We all do. Look." Tanis held out the map. "I don't think this is Darken Wood." According to this, Raceland ignored the map with disdain. The rest of the companions ignored the mage and, moving off the path, began setting up camp. Sturm sank down against a tree, his eyes closed in pain, while Karaman stared at those smaller, fleeting shadows with a hungry eye. At a signal from Karaman, Tasselhoff slipped off into the forest after firewood. Watching them, the mage's face twisted in a sardonic smile. "You are all fools. This is Darken Wood, as you will see before the night is ended." He shrugged. "But as you say, I need rest. However, I will not leave the path." Raceland sat down on the trail, his staff beside him. Karaman flushed in embarrassment as he saw the others exchanging amused glances. "Oh, raced," the big man said. "Join us. Tass has gone for wood, and maybe I can shoot a rabbit." "Shoot nothing." Raceland actually spoke above a whisper, making everyone start. "Harm nothing in Darken Wood. Neither plant nor tree, bird nor animal." "I agree with Raceland," Tanis said. "We have to spend the night here, and I don't want to kill any animal in this forest if we don't have to." "Elves never want to kill, period," Flint grumbled. "The magician scares us to death and you starve us. Well, if anything does attack us tonight, I hope it's edible." "You and me both, dwarf." Karaman heaved a sigh, went over to the creek, and began trying to assuage his hunger by drowning it. Tasselhoff returned with firewood. "I didn't cut it," he assured Raceland. "I just picked it up." But even Riverwind couldn't make the wood catch fire. "The wood's wet," he stated finally, and tossed his tinderbox back into his pack. "We need light," Flint said uneasily. as the night's shadows closed in thickly. Sounds in the woods that had been innocent in the daytime now seemed sinister and threatening. "Surely you do not fear children's stories," Raistlin hissed.
"No,"
snapped the dwarf.
"I just want to make certain that Kender doesn't rifle my pack in the dark."
"Very well," said Raistlin with unusual mildness. He spoke his word of command. "Shirak." A pale white light shone from the crystal on the tip of the mage's staff. It was a ghostly light, and did little to brighten the darkness. In fact, it seemed to emphasize the menace in the night. "There, you have light," the mage whispered softly. He thrust the bottom of the staff into the wet ground. It was then Tanis realized his elven vision was gone. He should have been able to see the warm red outlines of his companions, but they were nothing more than darker shadows against the starry darkness of the glade. The half-elf didn't say anything to the others, but the peaceful feeling he had been enjoying was pierced by a sliver of fear. "I'll take the first watch," Sturm offered heavily. "I shouldn't sleep with this head wound anyway. I once knew a man who did. He never woke up." "We'll watch in twos," Tanis said. "I'll take the first watch with you." The others opened packs and began making up beds on the grass, except for Raistlin. He remained sitting on the trail, the light of his staff shining on his bowed, hooded head. Sturm settled down beneath a tree. Tanis walked over to the brook and drank thirstily. Suddenly, he heard a strangled cry behind him. He drew his sword and stood all in one motion. The others had their weapons drawn. Only Raistlin sat, unmoving. "Put your swords away," he said. "They will do you no good. Only a weapon of powerful magic could harm these." An army of warriors surrounded them. That alone would have been enough to chill anyone's blood, but the companions could have dealt with that. What they couldn't handle was the horror that overwhelmed and numbed their senses. Each one recalled Caraman's flippant comment.
"I'll fight the living any day of the week, but not the dead."
These warriors were dead. Nothing more than fleeting, fragile white light outlined their bodies. It was as if the human warmth that had been theirs while they lived lingered on horribly after death. The flesh had rotted away, leaving behind the body's image as remembered by the soul. The soul apparently remembered other things too. Each warrior was dressed in ancient, remembered armor. Each warrior carried remembered weapons that could inflict well-remembered death. But the undead needed no weapons. They could kill from fear alone, or by the touch of their grave cold hands. How can we fight these things? Tanis thought wildly. He who had never felt such fear in the face of flesh and blood enemies, panic engulfed him, and he considered yelling for the others to turn and run for it. Angrily, the half-elf forced himself to calm down, to get a grip on reality. Reality! He almost laughed at the irony. Running was useless. They would get lost, separated. They had to stay and deal with this. Somehow. He began to walk toward the ghostly warriors. The dead said nothing, made no threatening moves. They simply stood, blocking the path. It was impossible to count them, since some glimmered into being, while others faded, only to return when their comrades dimmed. Not that it makes any difference, Tanis admitted to himself, feeling sweat chill his body. One of these undead warriors could kill all of us simply by lifting its hand. As the half-elf drew nearer to the warriors, he saw a gleam of light, Raistlin's staff. The mage, leaning on his staff, stood in front of the huddle of companions. Tanis came to stand beside him. The pale crystal light reflected on the mage's face, making it seem nearly as ghostly as the faces of the dead before him. "Welcome to Darkenwood, Tanis," the mage said. "Raceland," Tanis choked. He had to try more than once to get his dry throat to form a sound. "What are these?" "Spectral minions," the mage whispered, without taking his eyes from them. "We are fortunate." "Fortunate?" Tanis repeated incredulously. "Why?" "These are the spirits of men who gave their pledge to perform some task. They failed in that pledge, and it is their doom to keep performing the same task over and over until they win their release and find true rest in death." "How in the name of the abyss does that make us fortunate?" Tanis whispered harshly, releasing his fear and anger. "Perhaps they pledged to rid the forest of all who entered." "That is possible." Raceland flickered a glance at the half-elf. "Though I do not think it likely. We will find out." Before Tanis could react, the mage stepped away from the group and faced the specters. "Raised," Karaman said in a strangled voice, starting to shove forward. "Keep him back, Tanis," Raceland commanded harshly. "Our lives depend on this." Gripping the warrior's arm, Tanis asked Raceland, "What are you going to do?" "I am going to cast a spell that will enable us to communicate with them. I will perceive their thoughts. They will speak through me." The mage threw his head back, his hood slipping off. He stretched out his arms and began to speak. "Astbilak, Abilakar, Sutangus, Moipa," he murmured, then repeated that phrase 3 times.
Right back.
As Raceland spoke, the crowd of warriors parted, and a figure more awesome and terrifying than the rest appeared. The spectre was taller than the rest, and wore a shimmering crown. His pallid armor was richly decorated with dark jewels. His face showed the most terrible grief and anguish. He advanced upon Raceland. Karaman choked and averted his eyes. Tanis dared not speak or cry out, fearful of disturbing the mage and breaking the spell. The spectre raised a fleshless hand, reached out slowly to touch the young mage. Tanis trembled. The spectre's touch meant certain death, but Raceland, entranced, did not move. Tanis wondered if he even saw the chill hand coming toward his heart. Then Raceland spoke. "You who have been long dead, use my living voice to tell us of your bitter sorrow. Then give us leave to pass through this forest. For our purpose is not evil, as you will see if you read our hearts." The spectre's hand halted abruptly. The pale eyes searched Raceland's face. Then, shimmering in the darkness, the spectre bowed before the mage. Tanis sucked in his breath. He had sensed Raceland's power, but this... Raceland returned the bow, then moved to stand beside the spectre. His face was nearly as pale as that of the ghostly figure next to him, the living dead and the dead living, Tanis thought, shuddering. When Raceland spoke, his voice was no longer the wheezing whispering of a fragile mage. It was deep and dark and commanding and rang through the forest. It was cold and hollow and might have come from below the ground. "Who are you who trespass in darkened wood?" Tanis tried to answer, but his throat had dried up completely. Karaman, next to him, couldn't even lift his head. Then Tanis felt movement at his side. The Kender! Cursing himself, he reached out to grab for Tasselhoff, but it was too late. The small figure, top-knot dancing, ran out into the light of Raceland's staff and stood before the spectre. Tasselhoff bowed respectfully. "I am Tasselhoff Burfoot," he said. "My friends," he waved his small hand at the group, "call me Tass. Who are you?"
"It matters little,"
the sepulchral voice intoned.
"Know only that we are warriors from a time long forgotten."
"Is it true that you broke a pledge and that's how you come to be here?" Tass asked with interest.
"It is. We pledged to guard this land. Then came the smoldering mountain from the heavens. The land was ripped apart. Evil things crept out from the bowels of the earth, and we dropped our swords and fled in terror until bitter death overtook us. We have been called to fulfill our oath, as evil once more stalks the land. And here will we remain until evil is driven back and balance is restored again."
Suddenly, Raceland gave a shriek and flung back his head, his eyes rolling upward until the watching companions could see only the whites. His voice became 1,000 voices crying out at once. This startled even the Kender, who stepped back a pace and looked around uneasily for Tanis. The spectre raised his hand in a commanding gesture, and the tumult ceased as though swallowed by the darkness.
"My men demand to know the reason you enter Darkened Wood. If it is for evil, you will find that you have brought evil upon yourselves, for you will not live to see the moons rise."
"No, not evil, certainly not," Tasselhoff said hurriedly. "It's kind of a long story, you see, but we're obviously not going anywhere in a big hurry, and you're obviously not either, so I'll tell it to you. To begin with, we were in the Inn of the Last Home in Solace. You probably don't know it. I'm not sure how long it's been there, but it wasn't around during the Cataclysm, and it sounds like you were. Well, there we were, listening to the old man talking of Huma, and he, the old man, not Huma, told Gold Moon to sing her song, and she said what song, and then she sang, and a seeker decided to be a music critic, and Riverwind, that's the tall man over there, shoved the seeker into the fire. It was an accident, he didn't mean to. But the seeker went up like a torch. You should have seen it. Anyway, the old man handed me the staff and said, "Hit him." And I did. And the staff turned to blue crystal, and the flames died, and...
"Blue crystal,"
the spectre's voice echoed hollowly from Raceland's throat as he began to walk toward them. Tanis and Sturm both jumped forward, grabbing Tass and dragging him out of the way. But the spectre seemed intent only on examining the group. His flickering eyes focused on Gold Moon. Raising a pale hand, he motioned her forward.
"No."
Riverwind tried to prevent her from leaving his side, but she pushed away gently and walked over to stand before the spectre, the staff in her hand. The ghostly army encircled them. Suddenly, the spectre drew his sword from its pallid sheath. He held it high overhead, and white light, tinged with blue flame, flickered from the blade. "Look at the star!"
Hey, Soy.
Gold Moon gasped.
I'm gonna show you this. Check
The
out what I
glowed pale blue as it answered
what I
the
won
sword.
over the weekend.
The ghostly king turned to Raceland.
Cause there was a
and reached
local
his pale hand toward the entranced mage.
tattoo convention that happened, and one of
Broke free of Tanis's
the
grip.
local smoke shops put an item up for
He lunged at the
a
undead
raffle,
warrior.
and I actually
The
won the
blade
raffle.
pierced the flickering body, but it was Karaman who screamed in pain and dropped
I
right
won
to the ground.
at
Tanis and Stern.
Dr. Dabber
Raceland
switch.
stared ahead, his
So I could do
expression
dabs out of.
unchanged, unmoving.
Let's do one
Karaman,
since
where?
you're here, Soy.
Tanis held him, trying frantically to see where the big man was injured.
Let's
My hand. Karaman rocked back and forth, sobbing. His
sit
left
this
hand,
down over
his sword
here.
thrust tightly under his
I
right
gotta
arm.
load this
What's the
first.
matter? Tanis asked. Then, seeing the warrior's sword on the ground, he knew. Karaman's sword was rimmed with frost. Tanis looked up in horror and saw the
Hope you're
specter's
doing well,
hand
though,
close
son.
tightly around Raistlin's wrist. A shudder racked the mage's frail body. His face twisted in pain, but he did not fall. The mage's eyes closed. The lines of cynicism and bitterness smoothed away, and the peace of death descended on him. Tanis watched in awe, only partially aware of Caramin's hoarse cries. He saw Raistlin's face transform again, this time imbued with ecstasy. The mage's aura of power intensified until it glowed around him with an almost palpable brilliance. "We are summoned," Raistlin said. The voice was his own, and yet like none Tanis had ever heard him use. "We must go." The mage turned his back on them and walked into the woods, the ghostly king's fleshless hand still grasping his wrist. The circle of undead parted to let him pass. "Stop them," Caramin moaned. He staggered to his feet. "We can't." Tanis fought to restrain him, and finally the big man collapsed
This is
in
loaded
Half-Elf's
now.
arms, weeping like a child. "We'll follow him.
Gotta
It'll be
use
all
these.
right. He's Magi, Cameron. We can't
Or
understand.
reverse
We'll follow." The eyes of the undead
Freezers.
flickered with an unholy light as they watched the companions pass them and enter the forest. The spectral army closed ranks behind them. The companions
There we
stepped
go.
into a raging battle. Steel rang, wounded men shrieked for help. So real was the clash of armies in the darkness that Sturm drew his sword reflexively. The tumult deafened him. He ducked and dodged unseen blows that he knew were aimed at him. He swung his sword in desperation at black air, knowing that he was doomed and there was no escape. He began to run, and he suddenly stumbled out of the forest into a barren, wasted glade. Raistlin stood before him,
And then
alone. The mage's eyes were closed. He sighed gently, then collapsed to the ground. Sturm ran to him. Then Caramin appeared, nearly knocking Sturm over to reach his brother and gather him tenderly in his arms. One by one, the others ran, as if driven into the grave. Raistlin was still murmuring strange, unfamiliar words. The spectre raced. Caramin sobbed brokenly. The mage's eyes flickered and opened. "Spell. Drain me," he whispered.
did it too hot.
"I must rest."
And rest ye shall.
Boomed a voice, a living voice. Tanis breathed a sigh
The
of
best
relief.
part about it is,
Even as he put his hand on his sword, quickly he and the others jumped protectively
oh yeah, it's
in
been
front of
not
Raistlin,
too bad.
turning to face outward, staring at the darkness. Then the silver moon appeared suddenly, as if a hand
Counting,
had produced it from beneath a black silk
The date's
scarf.
down to my birthday.
Now they could see the head and shoulders of a man standing amid the trees. His bare shoulders were as large and heavy as Caramin's. A mane of long hair curled around his neck. His eyes were black and glittered cold. The companions heard a rustling in the brush and saw the flash of the steel tip being raised, pointing at Tanis. "Put thy puny weapons down," the man warned. "Ye be surrounded and have not a chance." "A trick," Sturm growled. But even as he spoke,
Oh,
there was
that's,
a tremendous crashing and cracking of tree limbs. More men appeared, surrounding them, all armed with spears that glinted in the moonlight. The first
That's
man
what I
strode
won over the
toward
weekend on
the
a
companions stared in amazement, their hands on their weapons, blowing smoke.
as a giveaway.
The man wasn't a man at all.
Well, as a raffle, they did a raffle and
From the waist up, he had the body of a horse from the waist down. He cantered forward with easy glance, powerful muscles rippling across his
whatchamacallit.
Other centaurs moved.
I bought a
to the path
raffle
at his
ticket.
commanding gesture. Tanis sheathed
And,
his sword. Flint
I won.
sneezed.
But it's
We must come with us, the centaur ordered. My brother is ill, Caraman growled. He can't go anywhere. Lace him upon my back. The centaur said coolly. In fact, if any of you be tired, he may ride. Tanis asked. He is in no position to ask questions. The centaur reached out and prodded Caraman's back with his spear.
but
We travel far and fast.
the carp cap.
I suggest thee ride, but fear not.
But it's
He
called a
bowed
Dr.
before
Dabber.
Goldmoon, extending his foreleg and touching his hand to his
Yes.
shaggy hair.
Right now it's on
Harm will not come to thee this
for
night.
waxes. But I
Can
can
ride
switch
Tanis,
it.
please?
Begged
and,
Hasselhoff. Don't trust them. Flint sneezed violently.
Change this
I
cap
do
out to a
trust
different one.
Tanis muttered.
And I'll be able
We
to
don't seem to have a whole lot of race that Go
and
on,
smoke
Tanis.
flower, but
The
use
rest
it
of
for
you too.
wax.
Caraman
But
scowled
what's
at the
cool is this,
centaur's
how it's this
suspicion. Lifted
turning
his
light
rod in
like
his
that.
arms and set him upon the back
Watch,
of one of the
I
half
can
men,
switch
half
it.
animals. Raceland slumped
from
forward.
that to one like that
Climb up, the centaur said to
to no
Caraman.
light.
I can bear the weight of thee both. Thy brother will need thy support, for we ride swiftly tonight. Flushing with embarrassment, the big warrior clambered onto the centaur's broad back, his huge legs dangling almost to the ground. He put an arm around Raceland as the centaur galloped down the path. With excitement, jumped onto
But
the
a
centaur
shit like
and
that is
promptly
pretty much a rest
slid off
mode.
the other side into the mud. Stern, sighing, picked up the kender and set him on the centaur's back. Then, before Flint could protest, the knight lifted the dwarf up behind Taz. Flint tried to speak, but could only sneeze as the centaur.
But yeah,
Tanis rode
the
with
price
the
in the
first
store
centaur
for
who
one of
seemed to be the
these
leader.
is
Where are you taking us? Tanis asked.
over
again.
$300
The
bucks.
forest master. The centaur
And
answered. The forest master. Tanis repeated. Who is he? One like yourselves. She is the
yeah, it's like
forest master.
300
The
plus. It's
centaur
called a
replied,
Dr.
and began
Dabber
to
switch.
canter down the trail.
But I bought a
Tanis
$10
started to ask another question.
raffle
The centaur's
ticket.
quickened pace jolted him,
And
and he
I
nearly
actually
kicked
won.
through his tongue as he came down hard on the centaur's back. Feeling himself start to slide backwards, the centaur got faster and faster. Tanis threw his arms
I thought
around the
of it
centaur's broad torso.
since I actually won,
Hey,
which
Thee doesn't need
I
to
normally
squeeze
don't
me
win,
too. The
like
centaur glanced back,
raffles like that.
his eyes glittering in the moonlight. It'd
But,
be my job to see thee
I
stay
thought
calm.
of it as
Relax. Put thy
early,
hands on me rump to balance thyself. There now.
er,
Grip with thy
early
legs.
birthday present.
The centaurs left
Since
the
my
trail
birthday's
and
on
plunged into
Wednesday.
the forest. The moonlight was
Oh, yeah,
immediately
it's
swallowed up by
definitely
the
a
dense trees. Tanis
pricey
felt
one.
branches whip past, swiping at his clothing. The centaur never swerved or slowed in his gallop, however, and Tanis could only assume he knew the trail well, a trail the half-elf couldn't see. Soon the pace began to slacken, and the centaur finally came to a stop. Tanis could see nothing in the smothering darkness. He knew his companions were near only because he could hear Raceland's shallow breathing, Caraman's jingling armor, and Flint's unabated sneezing. Even the light from Raceland's staff had died. A powerful magic is laid on this forest, the mage whispered weakly when Tanis asked him about it. This magic dispels all others. Tanis's uneasiness grew. Why are we stopping? Because thee art here. Dismount, the centaur ordered gruffly. Where is here? Tanis slid off the centaur's broad back onto the ground. He stared around him, but could see nothing. Apparently, the trees kept even the smallest
Right,
glimmer of
right
moonlight
now
or
it's just
starlight from penetrating
sitting
through the
at
trail.
rest. It'll sit.
He stands in the center of
Pretty much with
dark
whatever
wood.
colored light you put on.
The centaur replied,
When it's not being used, it'll just sit
and
there
now
like
I
that.
bid thee farewell,
Or you could turn it off.
or fare evil, depending on
'Cause
how
what
the
was it,
forest master judges thee.
Full
Wait a
charge when I got it.
Harriman
'Cause when I
called out
got it,
You can't leave us here in the middle of this forest, blind as newborn kittens. Stop them,
what's it
Tannis
called?
ordered, reaching for his sword. But his weapon was gone. An
It
explosive
didn't
oath
have
from
any
Stern
charge, so it's pretty
indicated
much
I had discovered the same thing.
a charge from
The centaur chuckled.
completely dead to
Tannis
full
heard
charge.
hooves beat
And that
with the
took,
soft earth, and tree branches rustled. The centaurs were gone. Good riddance. Flint sneezed.
About almost 2 hours to fully
Are we all
charge
here?
it.
Tannis asked, reaching out his hand and feeling Sturm's strong, reassuring grip.
Oh yeah,
I'm here.
I just know the
Oh,
basic
Tannis, wasn't it wonderful?
on it as far as like
Tannis snapped.
playing with the lights,
We're here.
and of course the
Said Riverwind
different
grimly.
temperatures and
Weaponless.
the self-cleaning,
No
but
one has a weapon.
it's got settings to where
Not that it would
like
do us
your
much
draw
good in this
time,
blessed blackness.
to where
He amended bitterly.
how it kept heating up after I took the first hit.
Gold Moon's low voice.
There's a setting on it to where you could
And a formidable weapon that is, daughter of Grey Shoe.
shorten that
Primitive
time
voice.
so it's not such a
weapon for good,
big hit.
intended to combat illness
Because the way it's
and
set right now,
disease.
when I could
The
put it
unseen voice
a
grew
dab
softer.
ender like that, hit
Numerous
it,
times it was
pass
also
it to
used as a
most
weapon
hated grower,
against
he could take a
evil
big
creatures
rip
who
off
seek
of it,
to find
and then it's just
and banish
he can hand it back to
of
me,
the world.
and it's just barely starting to cool down. So
Chapter 11.
it has a pretty long
The
one.
Forest Master. A peaceful interlude. Who are you? Tannis called.
Let me
Show
load
yourself.
it again. Give me
We
1
will not
second.
harm you, bluffed Caravan. Of course you will. Now the deep voice.
Because I gotta
You
load
have no
this one,
weapon.
a little ceramic
I
bucket,
will return them.
Load
when
it.
Time is propitious.
grab it with
No one
these,
brings weapons
little
to
tweezers.
Darkenwood. Not even a knight of Solamnia.
drop it in there,
Do not fear, noble knight.
and then hit it.
I recognize your blade as
So
ancient
let's get
and
this
most
done.
valuable.
Where's my
I will keep
dabbler at?
Forgive this apparent lack of trust, but even the great Humor laid the Dragonlance at my feet. Humor? Sturm gasped. Who are you? I am the Forest Master. Even as the deep voice,
Oh yeah, cheers, Soy.
the darkness parted. A gasp of awe, gentle as a spring wind, swept the company as they stared before them.
Not too big of one.
Silver moonlight shone brightly on a high rock ledge. Standing
Try
on the
not to
ledge
overload it.
was a unicorn.
Still getting the hang of it.
She regarded them coolly, her intelligent eyes gleaming.
Cause I just barely, I just barely got it yesterday
Unicorn's beauty pierced the heart.
when I won that giveaway.
Swift tears spring to her eyes, and she was forced to close them against the animal's magnificent radiance. Her fur was the silver of moon.
Let me take
Her
a
horn
drink
was
before
shining pearl. Her mane like sea foam. The
I
head might have been sculpted from glistening marble, but no
Get
human
this
or even
started.
dwarven hand could capture the elegance and grace that lived in the fine lines of the powerful neck and muscular chest. The legs were strong but delicate, the hooves small and cloven like those of a goat. In later days, when Gold Moon walked dark paths and her heart was weak with despair and hopelessness, she had only to shut her eyes and remember the
take the
unicorn.
carb cap off.
The unicorn tossed her head and then lowered it in grave welcome. The companions, feeling awkward and clumsy and confused.
Now this is the, like you're playing, remember that game Operation? That's what it feels like to me.
Tannis, feeling a spell lifted from him, looked around. The bright silver moonlight lit a sylvan glade. Tall trees surrounded them like giant, beneficent guardians.
There
The
we go.
half-elf was aware of a deep, abiding sense of peace. There was also a weighty sadness. Rest, the forest master said as she came among them. You are
I
tired.
have it set on the lower setting,
Food will be brought.
so
Fresh water.
and all you gotta do is
You may put aside your watchfulness and fears for this evening.
wait till it turns green.
Safety exists here. If it exists anywhere in this land tonight. Karen, his eyes lighting up at the mention of food, eased his brother to the ground. So much as just terribly exhausted. Karen looking around for food.
Hell yeah. I appreciate it, sorry.
Roasted deer, sizzling bit of rabbit. Hush. Sturm remonstrated softly, glancing at the forest master. She probably. Centaurs came out wearing a clean white cloth, which they spread on the grass. Others placed clear crystal glow lights on the floor, illuminating the tassels of the lights furiously. The crystal globes held thousands of tiny bugs, each one having two brightly glowing spots.
What's cool is after it's all
They
said and
crawled
done,
around inside the globes, apparently content to explore. The centaurs brought bowls of
it has a self-cleaning mode.
white cloths to bathe their faces and hands. The water refreshed their bodies and minds as it washed away the stains of that. Chairs which carried they were crafted from pieces of wood that they appeared comfortable, except that each chair had only one leg.
I definitely got to change it on that lower setting.
Said the forest master. I can't sit in that. He stood at the edge of the table, his eyes. The tablecloth is spread on the grass. I'll sit on the grass with you. Close to the food, muttered Flint into his beak. The others glanced uneasily at the chairs, the strange crystal bug lamps, and the centaurs. The chieftain's daughter, however, knew what was expected of guests, although the outside world might have considered her people barbarians. Goldwing had strict rules of politeness. Goldwing knew that to keep your host to both the host and his mount. She sat down with grips. The one-legged chair rocked. Slight adjustment.
Definitely got to put that on the lower one.
Itself to her alone.
That was a rough one.
She said, for conscious of the many hours. Riverwind's face showed though he was a loser, trying to bend his tall body to a seemingly fragile chair. But once seated, he leaned back comfortably, almost smiling in disbelief. Thank you.
Because this thing has
Gold Moon said hastily, to cover the other's hesitation.
25 different
That's all right.
heat settings.
Holding his arms across his chest.
So I'm still
I'm not going to sit in these weird
trying to get the hang of temperature wise, and I definitely got to take it off because it's broken down into
well, if he can do it,
different levels of colors.
His decision by the fact that the centaurs were bringing he helped his brother to a seat and making sense or his way. 4 centaurs positioned themselves at each of the 4 quarters of
in the color
spread out above the ground.
of heat level that this is at right now is yellow, which is the highest, and then you get it down at least 2 because even at the lowest level of it,
How splendid!
It was way too harsh.
Tasselhoff cried, peering underneath the cloth. There's nothing under there.
Now I gotta take
He reported, his eyes wide.
that
The
little bucket
centaurs
out.
laughed uproariously, and even the forest master smiled. Next, the centaurs laid down plates made of beautifully cut and polished wood. Each guest was given a knife
That
and
shit was
fork
rough.
fashioned from the horns of a deer. Platters of hot roasted meat filled the air with a tantalizing, smoky aroma. Great red loaves of bread and huge wooden bowls of fruit glistened in the hot lamp. Karen, feeling secure in his chair, rubbed his hands together. Then he grinned broadly and picked up his fork. Ah! He sighed in appreciation as one of the centaurs set before him a platter of roasted deer meat. Karaman plunged his fork in, sniffing in rapture at the steam and juice that gushed forth from the meat. Suddenly, he realized everyone was staring at him. He stopped and looked around. What?
There we go.
He asked, blinking. Then his eyes rested on the forest master, and he flushed and hurriedly removed his fork.
There we go.
I beg your pardon. The deer must have been someone you knew. I mean,
Now it's at
the forest master
a whole nother
BID,
color level,
she
which
said.
is another heat level.
The deer fulfills his purpose in life by providing
Because that other one
for
was
the
way too hot.
or man. We do not mourn the loss of those who die fulfilling their destiny. It seemed to Tannis that the forest master's dark
Let's
eyes
set that down for a
went
second.
stern as she spoke. There was a deep sadness in them that filled the half-elf's heart.
Yeah, that was fucking.
But when he turned back to the forest master, he saw the
You don't get the
magnificent
temperature
animal's
right. It's
My imagination.
it's pretty brutal.
How do we know, Master? Tannis asked hesitantly,
Excuse me.
whether the life of any creature has fulfilled its destiny. I have known the very old to die in bitterness and despair. I have seen young children die before their time, but I leave behind such a legacy of love and joy that grief was tempered. Their brief lives have given much to others. You have answered your own question, Tannis, half-elven, far better than I could. The forest master said gravely, say that our lives are measured not by gain, but by giving. The half-elf started to reply, but the forest master interrupted. Put your cares aside for now. Enjoy the peace of my forest while you may. Its time is passing. Tannis glanced sharply at the forest master, but the great animal had turned her attention away from him and was staring far off into the woods,
It
her
definitely
eyes
gets you.
clouded with sorrow. The half-elf wondered what she meant, and he sat, lost in dark thoughts, until he felt a gentle hand touch his. You should eat, Gold Moon said. Your cares won't vanish with the meal, and if they do, so much the better. Tannis smiled at her and began to eat with a sharp appetite. He took the forest master's advice and relegated his worries to the back of his mind for a while. Gold Moon was right. They weren't likely to go away.
Still trying to
The
catch my
rest of
breath
the
after that one.
companions did the same, accepting the surroundings with the aplomb of seasoned travelers, though there was nothing to drink but water, much to Flint's disappointment. The cool, clear liquid washed the terrors and doubts from their hearts, as it had cleansed the blood and dirt from their hands. They laughed, talked, and ate, enjoying each other's companionship. The forest master spoke to them no more, but watched each in turn. Sturm's pale face had regained some color. He ate with grace and dignity. Sitting next to Tasselhoff, he answered the Kender's inexhaustible store of questions about his homeland. He also, without calling undue attention to the fact, removed from Tasselhoff's pouch a knife and fork that had unaccountably made their way there. The knight sat as far from Caraman as possible and did his best to ignore him. The big warrior was obviously enjoying his meal. He ate 3 times more than anyone else, 3 times as fast, and 3 times as loudly. When not eating, he described to Flint a fight with a troll, using the bone he was chewing on as a sword to illustrate his thrusts and parries. Flint ate heartily and told Caraman he was the biggest liar in Kryn. Raceland, sitting beside his brother, ate very little, taking nibbles of only the tenderest meat, a few grapes, and a bit of bread he soaked in water first. He said nothing, but listened intently to everyone, absorbing all that was said into his soul, storing it for future reference and use. Gold Moon ate her meal delicately, with practiced ease. The Pueshu princess was accustomed to eating in public view and could make conversation easily. She chatted with Tanis, encouraging him to describe the elven lands and other places he had visited. Riverwind, next to her, was acutely uncomfortable and self-conscious. Although not a boisterous eater like Caraman, the plainsman was obviously more accustomed to eating at the campfires of his fellow tribesmen than in royal halls. He handled cutlery with awkward clumsiness, and he knew that he appeared crude beside Gold Moon. He said nothing, seeming willing to fade into the background. Finally, everyone began shoving plates away and settling back in the strange wooden chairs, ending their dinner with pieces of sweet shortcake. Task began to sing his Kender trail song to the delight of the centaurs. Then suddenly, Raceland spoke. His soft, whispering voice slithered through the laughter and loud talk. "Forest Master." The mage hissed the name. "Today we fought loathsome creatures that we have never seen before on Kryn. Can you tell us of these?" The relaxed and festive mood was smothered as effectively as if covered by a shroud. Everyone exchanged grim looks. "These creatures walk like men," Caraman asked, "but look like reptiles. They have clawed hands and feet and wings and..." His voice dropped. "They turn to stone when they die." The forest master regarded them with sadness as she rose to her feet. She seemed to expect the question. "I know of these creatures," she answered. "Some of them entered the darkened wood with a party of goblins from Haven a week ago. They wore hoods and cloaks, no doubt to disguise their horrible appearance. The centaurs followed them in secret to make certain they harmed no one before the spectral minions dealt with them. The centaurs reported that the creatures call themselves Draconi and speak of belonging to the Order of Draco." Raceland's brow furrowed. "Draco," he whispered, puzzled. "But who are they? What race or species?" "I do not know. I can tell you only this. They are not of the animal world, and they belong to none of the races of Kryn." This took a moment for everyone to assimilate. Caraman blinked. I don't," he began. "She means, my brother, that they are not of this world," Raceland explained impatiently. "And where'd they come from?" Caraman asked, startled. "That's the question, isn't it?" Raceland said coldly. "Where did they come from? And why?" "I cannot answer that." The forest master shook her head. "But I can tell you that before the spectral minions put an end to these Draconians, they spoke of armies to the north. I saw them." Tanis rose to his feet. "Campfires." His voice caught in his throat as he realized what the forest master had been about to say. Armies of these Draconians. There must be thousands. Now everyone
All kinds of sirens
on top
going
of
on
the
outside.
Impossible. The knight said, scowling. Who's behind this? The Seekers? By the gods. Caraman bellowed. I've got a notion to go to Haven and bash. Go to Salamnia, not Haven. Sturm advised loudly. We should travel to Qualanost. Tanis argued. The elves. The elves have their own problems. The forest master interrupted, her cool voice a calming influence. As do the high seas of Haven. No place is safe. But I will tell you where you must go to find answers to your questions. What do you mean you will tell us where to go? Raceland stepped forward slowly, his red robes rippling around him as he walked. What do you know of us? The mage paused, his eyes narrowing with a sudden thought. Yes, I was expecting you. The forest master replied in answer to Raceland's thought. A great and shining being appeared to me in the wilderness this day. He told me that the one bearing the blue crystal staff would come this night to Darkened Wood. The spectral minions would let the staff-bearer and her companions pass, though they have allowed no human or elf or dwarf or kender to enter Darkened Wood since the cataclysm. I was to give the bearer of the staff this message. You must fly straight away across the East Wall Mountains. In 2 days, the staff-bearer must be within Zack-Tsaroth. There, if you prove worthy, you shall receive the greatest gift given to the world.
East Wall Mountains?
The dwarf's mouth dropped open.
We'll need to fly all right to reach Zack-Tsaroth in 2 days' time. Shining being. Ha!
He snapped his fingers. The rest glanced uneasily at each other. Finally, Tanis said hesitantly, I'm afraid the dwarf is right, Forest Master. The journey to Zack-Tsaroth would be long and perilous. We would have to go back through lands we know are inhabited by goblins and these Draconians. And then we would have to pass through the plains. Riverwind spoke for the first time since meeting the Forest Master. Our lives are forfeit. He gestured toward Gold Moon. The Quayshu are fierce fighters, and they know the land. They are waiting. We would never get through safely. He looked at Tanis, and my people have no love for elves.
And why go to Zack-Tsaroth anyway? Caraman rumbled. Greatest gift. What could that be? A powerful sword? A chest of steel coins? That would come in handy, but there's a battle brewing up north apparently. I'd hate to miss it.
The Forest Master nodded gravely. I understand your dilemma, she said. I offer what help is in my power. I will see to it that you reach Zack-Tsaroth in 2 days. The question is, will you go?
Alright, everyone. Probably gonna call it into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. If we appreciate all y'all support. Excuse me. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.